we thought we'd go through some of the key updates we've seen in the first 6 races.
The first quarter of the Formula 1 2025 season is now over, so we thought we'd go through some of the key technical developments from those first 6 races and explain them in a little bit of depth. And we thought we'd start with Red Bull's latest upgrade from Miami, where they changed a significant portion of their floor. So here we have Yuki Tsunoda's car from Miami, and he did not have the latest upgrade. So we'll just take you through the original floor as it was, and then we'll compare that to Max Verstappen's car, and you'll be able to see where the key differences of the floor are. And then if we pop a little bit of a highlight on this, you'll be able to see what's going on. So obviously this is Tsunoda's car with the old floor. Now this little scroll here, when you're turning and you're in yaw, imagine that you're just slightly offset from the direction of oncoming airflow. So it almost acts as a little bit of a sort of diffuser area there, also acts to help seal the floor as well. So if we just mark these little fins here, we can see that ultimately these are creating a little bit of a flick up in the airflow passing around the floor and bringing it into play slightly elsewhere as well. But also we'll just sort of go through the shape of it quickly as well, just mark around it in a green pen here, and you can just kind of get a sense of the shape of this scroll here. Now what we're going to do is compare that to Max Verstappen's car, because it is quite different and they have changed quite a lot. So if we bring Verstappen's car into play just to do a little bit of a side-by-side, and you can see that the distribution of all of the fins has changed significantly. So I'm just going to mark them with an arrow here, here and here, and you've got those pieces there, there and there. But also what you can see is that the shape of this scroll has indeed changed. It's a bit longer along the span, as you can perhaps sense here. It's a little bit shorter on Tsunoda's car, and so you are changing the camber of this element here. You can see it's a little bit larger at this point here. You're changing the camber and you are changing the size of it as well, so you're getting a little bit more airflow expansion out of it and just drawing a little bit more downforce out of the floor. But one of the things that Red Bull wanted to address was just to ensure that the downforce that the floor was producing was a lot more stable, and that one of the key things about the Red Bull this year has been that it's been pretty difficult to get into the right window with regards to setup. It's been a little bit difficult to drive. Max Verstappen has been able to get it into the window for qualifying sessions. It does take him, I think, through the sessions to do that, but he's able to drive it pretty effectively. And so him getting the first edition of the new floor in Miami gives them the sense of, okay, if Max can push it and he finds it a little bit easier, then when we give it to Yuki at the next round or whenever, he should be able to find it a little bit easier to drive as well. So that is the rationale behind this brand new floor. But we'll just take a look at another angle of this as well, because I think this Red Bull floor is pretty complex. So we've got, again, Max's car on top and Yuki's car on the bottom. And they're not exactly one-to-one photos, but you can kind of see the position of these flick-ups here. And so we can illustrate how the airflow likes to move around the car. You can see it transported around the sides of the car like this. Just to note that area there, that is not a slot. We have had to enhance it in check, and it isn't. It is just simply a little bit of a bump, a little bit of a blister where the side intrusion panel the side intrusion spar is. But you can see the position of all of these little winglets, just adding a little bit of a flick up. And again, on Max's car here, you can see a slightly different distribution of these. And it just helps to bring up some of the air. Anything that's a little bit turbulent in this area, it's really, really detrimental to the floor performance. So it just helps to lift that away and pull it away from the floor and just ensure that everything under the body is clean and laminar, and allows the aerodynamicists to take full advantage of it and do so in as stable a way as possible. We're going to take a look at the Ferrari now. This is a change that the team made to its floor in Bahrain. And again, it's quite a subtle change, so we'll just walk through it here and try and mark it up for you. So every team runs with something like this. This is almost like what bargeboard used to be in the previous rule set. It is the outer floor fence, And teams are trying to find ways to use something that is pretty strictly regulated. Now, it's very, very common to see teams use a corner like this to produce some kind of vorticity, strengthen the airflow, and then it sort of packages it up and allows it to be used for something a little bit further downstream. But Ferrari's taken a little bit different approach to things with its bar-rain floor. And actually, to illustrate that point here, so as you can see, we've got the corner here and we've got two very, very small corners here. But if we look at the positioning of these corners, there is a very, very slight ramp between the outer edge and the corners being used. So trying to move these vortex generating corners inboard to just place that degree of airflow. So Ferrari here using something quite different, and you can kind of follow along the airflow here, obviously going into the inlet here, following aft of that. But what we've also got is this inner floor fence as well, and they've changed the top surface here, so there is a very slight corner, almost like a little dog leg here. And again, this is all here to help generate some degree of vorticity. So I'm just going to draw these on here, and you can kind of get a sense of where this is coming from. Obviously, you have to change in air pressure at this point, and then you sort of get this miscible flow state, and that's what's creating our vortex here. It's a very, very detailed change again, but we're into that point in 2025 where we're seeing these teams make very, very tiny changes to the car in order to try and get a little bit more out of it. The margins are so narrow now, cars are separated by half a tenth in qualifying. So let's take a little bit of a different angle of these Ferrari floor fences. Both of these pictures taken by my colleague Phil Clearon, who was out in Bahrain and very kindly obliged me with some photos. So again, you can see the inner floor fence here and that dog leg shape. And again, you are just generating this vorticity and allowing it to follow and cascade down the floor as well. But you can also see the position of this inset floor fence here as well. If I just mark the end of that here. And so you've got this little ramp and airflow is just able to follow it down. And let's just have a little bit of fun and follow along the floor with our little diagram tools and just show you what's going on with this Ferrari floor. You can just basically make out the shapeliness of it, and it's a very, very clear gradient of what they want to do with this airflow. Again, super complicated with regards to these floors. You want that big undercut. You also want to build that pressure difference, simply because having a high pressure on top, low pressure on bottom, simplest way to create any quick level of downforce. Obviously, you do have to balance that with various aspects of the car handling traits, vehicle dynamics package, suspension, all that kind of thing. But ultimately increasing the floor performance, that's where the main level of performance is in these 2022 to 2025 cars. It'll be very different next year. But just to segue onto a final look at a floor, we do have the look at the back end of the McLaren MCL 13.9 and looking at the diffuser from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is something that McLaren brought to the round, but it didn't necessarily race with. But we just want to take a little look, have a little bit of appreciation for the detail in this area. So let's look. All of these braking sort of cascade wings here, all slotting into a very, very small area there to generate quite a lot of downforce actually. The wingspans may be small, but there's a lot of tiny wings and you can just allow them to stack up together and you just create this cumulative effect. And again, you have a little bit further forward here, just allows everything to stay attached and use much greater cambers in total. Now, obviously, you'll notice on this picture that it is a little bit difficult to see into the diffuser, but you can just sort of make out the general sort of shape of the boat tail here. It's a little bit difficult to mark out, but you can kind of see the span. Again, this boat tail here, that you have the plank right there, and it's all about trying to maximize the diffuser space that you got there, because the more expansion that you can get, the more suction that you generate at the rear of the car, and so you can accelerate the air through the floor much, much quicker. And so that's just going to ensure that you're getting a nice low pressure underneath the floor with that high airspeed, and therefore you're going to be generating a lot more downforce. Just as an aside, that's why so many teams have gone for the, I'm just going to mark that out here in probably in green. You can kind of see that there. Why so many teams have gone for push rod rear suspension, because if you were running with a pull rod like this, you would have to house your rockers and your springs in this particular area of the car. And that would make it a lot more difficult to package effectively. You would have to cut down on your overall floor space. And so by mounting it higher up and having your rocker mechanism around this area here, it just allows you a lot more space, maybe at the cost of centre of gravity, but that's why everyone's kind of flipped the formula around. And just finally on the McLaren, while we're here, one of its sort of idiosyncrasies, if you like, is just the position of the two beam wings that allows you, just imagine the airflow is passing out of the diffuser like this. You can kind of see it from the dirt on the photo. The beam wing just links up nicely with the diffuser. And then you've got a secondary beam wing here, which is completely detached from the bottom element, and that's just there for stability more than anything. The team sometimes runs with it, sometimes it doesn't. You'll notice that if you look at pictures of the back end of the car through various races. And then finally, we just want to take a look at the team that's brought the most developments to 2025, which is Sauber. Now, it's not necessarily translated to on-track performance yet, but there's a few interesting quirks about what Sauber's done. Back in Japan, we were lucky enough to be given a session with performance director Stefano Sordo at Sauber, and he said that it's not just about improving the car, it's also about improving the tools back at the base as well, because as we know, the team is preparing for 2026, and therefore it wants to make sure that its wind tunnel, it wants to make sure its simulation tools are completely where they need to be. So by continuing to develop in the early part of 2025, the team has managed to find a little bit of pace. It got them all of its points this season so far in the first round in Melbourne, and that is where we're going to start, and that's with a look at these side pods here. So what we can see is in this area here, the team has already started this year with something very, very akin to what McLaren has done with its intakes, but the top edge of the side pod surprisingly different to the other teams on the grid. So you can kind of see the back line here closest to the chassis. That's where the airflow is following that path in the yellow, but also we've got this little dip in the sort of second third of these side pods, and you can just see that it would allow the airflow to bleed down a little bit, and perhaps they were trying to channel more air towards the undercut here. So it's quite interesting that Sauber started the season with a side pod like this. You did have a couple of teams last year where they did use a little bit of a sort of what you might call a swage line or a dip or whatever you want to call it, just to bleed a little bit of airflow down towards the back end of the side pod. Perhaps they felt that the airflow in this particular area here wasn't perhaps getting enough energy. It was struggling to stay attached, and so maybe bleed a little bit off the top to energize that. But there was quite the change for China in that it went for a much more conventional side pod package. So we've got the two side by side here. Actually, let's flip that around a second. Thank you very much. Obviously, the ECATS F1 team stake backwards, I think. But we can see the very, very clear difference between the two. So I'll mark this out in yellow, the general sort of back flow sort of there, and then using this funny little arrow system here, the sort of two diverging paths there. But then we've got this much more conventional here. It's a little bit difficult to draw actually from this angle, but you can just essentially follow that down. You can see this sort of similar shape here. And what I think this bulge in the middle is trying to do, I think that's there to try and mitigate a little bit of lift. Can't guarantee that, but I'd seem to recall teams doing various similar things, particularly at the front of their car with little bulges at the bottom, just to kind of ensure that it wasn't producing too much of a lift effect, just to negate that a little bit. So Sauber has been hard at work. We're just going to have a little look at the differences between their two front wing designs. Now, this is something that the team, again, introduced very early into the season. Actually, when it came to pre-season testing, it had a different wing arrangement. So this was introduced the final day of pre-season testing. And I just want to mark something interesting here, which is this sort of scalloped top edge here. You can see the way that it almost has three kind of sides there, three edges there, let's say. Is quite an interesting shape. It did shift from slightly outboard loaded front wing, where you would have most of your wing sort of span here. It now has taken some of that out, so you can kind of see that it's a little bit more inboard loaded, generally speaking. But we're also going to take a look at the wing that they brought to Saudi Arabia and also used in Miami. It is a slightly lower downforce wing, but it does follow a much more conventional inboard loaded kind of structure, let's say. Again, so if I mark that sort of scalloped top edge here, you can see there's a much smoother progression here. And again, as you can probably notice from the overall camber of the wing, that it is a slightly lower downforce model. It's there to balance with a slightly lower downforce rear wing, because Saudi Arabia and Miami, you want to maximize your top speed on all the straights, all of the high speed zones, that kind of thing. So you just don't need as much front wing performance if you're relying on the floor, especially a lot more as well. You can just take a little bit of drag out, try and get a little bit more top speed. But I just thought that was interesting because Sauber clearly has been hard at work trying to develop parts. I think it's it's registered new parts for, I think, all but one race. I think the only one that it didn't register any parts for was Bahrain. So clearly every single team on the grid is trying to make something of 2025. Maybe we expected they wouldn't, but everybody is at least giving it a go. So that now then brings us on to Imola. So we're expecting quite a few new parts there, as is tradition at the start of the European season, and then we'll be moving on to Monaco and then Barcelona, where quite a few teams will have a new front wing owing to the flexing trickery and the new load tests in place for that race. So that's it for upgrades in the first quarter of this Formula One season, and hopefully we have a few more to talk about in the second quarter. And also let us know if you've seen anything interesting on the grid this year, and we might do an extra video just to make sense of it all. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.